Welcome to Cats and Rats Podcast, covering your Florida Panthers.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Cats and Rats Hockey Podcast. I'm your host, Kirby Lupo, alongside my co-hosts, Nick Levine and Cody Stevens. It's a little cold right now up here north of the border, so I'm trying to stay warm, but the Panthers are hot on the ice right now. They've won 7 of their last 8. They've become road warriors over this recent stretch here, and as well, really good special teams-wise, power play, penalty kill, and now the schedule starts to favor the Panthers. All these games in the Eastern time zone. They don't leave the Eastern time zone until I think the next game maybe in March against Dallas. A lot of home games, be it against divisional opponents or Eastern Conference opponents. And the Panthers are starting to roll here again. So, Nick, what have you thought about this recent stretch from our Florida Panthers here?
It's been really impressive. I think that the biggest emphasis in this 8-game in this recent stretch that you just mentioned was at all facets of the game are clicking right now. Power play, penalty kill, 5-on-5. I had a little bit of a concern with the 5-on-5 scoring, but I'm not too concerned about that heading into the future because we're generating a ton of chances 5-on-5. Power play has been unbelievable since December 23rd. We're second in the NHL in the power play. The penalty kill outside of that one-off against Minnesota really been very consistent. It's been very strong. Coming out of the All-Star break, had that little hiccup against Philly, but other than that, the Panthers have been playing really strong. Bob's been spectacular, and I've been really pleased with our play, and hopefully we can continue it going forward.
And Cody, yourself?
I mean, this stretch for Florida has been extremely impressive. I mean, defeating some really tough teams, Colorado being one. Like I said, as Nick said, I mean, everything's clicking right now for Florida. I mean, that hiccup against Philly was not the greatest of games, but once again, they've proven that they can bounce back from these and have won 3 straight since then. I mean, beating a desperate Washington team, trying to stay in the playoff hunt. I mean, just dominating a Colorado team who's everyone is a consensus Stanley Cup contender, and then just walking into Pittsburgh and just dummying them. And that game was no contest. I mean, Florida just continues to be one of the best teams in the NHL, if not the hottest team right now, if outside of maybe the Edmonton Oilers, but everything's going well for them right now.
Yeah, and like you guys both said, I think, if you look at this team individually, or even collectively as a unit, as, Paul Maurice often comments on, I think that's a change from Paul Maurice from his time in Winnipeg. I used to hear a lot of his press conferences and him talk about Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler. And it wasn't as much as him standing up for the leaders in the room. I think it was him fighting the Canadian media and protecting, his star players. And that's one element that he doesn't have to do with Florida. And the way that Alexander Barkov brings his game in and game out, the way that Matthew Tkachuk is now producing, especially on the score sheet, but even some nights playing really solid fundamental defensive style game as a winger. He's not having to stand up for those guys in the room, and the way that Bobrovsky has been playing net here, the NHL, star of the week, and just different accolades that he's got here as an all-star of late in this first half of the season. It's just everything's going well. We talk about on our post-game Twitter X Spaces not to get nervous about this team. It's such a relaxing viewing experience for me as a lifelong Panther fan that has seen everything, every gamut of emotion. And this team just kind of breathes that relaxed feel into me. And it started with me last year in the playoffs, guys, as we went along in that Boston series, and especially as we went into that Toronto series and we scored that early game 1 goal. That just really settled my kind of temperament, emotions on this team, and just guys that are able to come through in big time moments, and how the national media, be it in the States, in Canada, is talking about us and saying this is a team that is must-watch TV and is appointment television. And it's just so humbling, honoring to feel like this team is ours and everyone else has those feelings about us, and there's fans in our fan base, that we go out with and stuff like that. You're always going to do that with your own fans, on an off night, like we saw against the Philadelphia Flyers there. But that's fans in the motion, in the moment after losses. And this team's really putting it together right now. But let's transition, guys, into our main segment here in episode 2. Something that I put a little thought into, and we've talked about over the last week or two here. It's Make Your Case For series. So this is series number 1. And if you're following the Panthers closely at all, you realize that Bill Zito has a hard job ahead of him here. Which players will come back? Which players won't? If you guys could see my DMs on a daily basis, every morning, every week, people hitting me up. Kirby, are we bringing this player back? Are we bringing that player back? Do we have room for this guy if we let this guy walk? There's no way that Zito can bring all of these players back. And I get these questions all the time. I want to bring it to the podcast here. I want you guys, you listeners as a community, interacting with us on this, talking about this when we tweet this out, when we share this on Instagram. Again, our new account on Instagram, Cats and Rats Podcast. Make sure to drop us a follow there. And we'll have a lot of group interactions. So make sure to make your comments publicly. I know some of you are a little shyer and will message me, privately, but we want to see that interaction publicly. That's it's just a good talking point leading up to the trade deadline, leading up to July 1st this summer, and kind of what Zito's got ahead of him here. But let's start with this season right now. We'll get to some other names in future podcast episodes, but we're going to start for making the case for Gustav Forsling that Cody has tonight, Sam Reinhart that Nick has, and I have Brandon Money Montour. Now, I said we can draw names out of the hat. Cody doesn't need to have Ekblad. I don't need to have my guy Montour, but this is kind of how we went along with series 1 here. We kind of came to an agreement here. They also said to me, Kirby, you might have the hardest case to make here. So we'll save that for last, but we'll start off first with Cody with Gustav Forsling. Make the case for him.
Yep. As long as we understand Nick has the easiest case to make.
Yeah, that's kind of built in.
Don't even need notes for that case, but
we agree on that. We all agree on that part.
I mean, yes.
Yeah.
But for Gustav Forsling, I mean, a fan favorite, I must say, because of the story of how he came to be a Florida Panther, was a waiver wire pickup from the Carolina Hurricanes back in 2021. But a little bit background for him: if he was drafted in 2014, a 5th-round pick out of Linköping, Sweden, and it was selected 126 overall by the Vancouver Canucks. Since then, was traded from Vancouver, started his career in Chicago, then ended up in Carolina, then again got bounced around the minors, ended up in the Carolina system, and then ended up on waivers and ended up here in Florida, and he has blossomed here ever since.
Steve Goldstein always lets everyone know that he's a waiver wire gem. Just wanted to add that.
I mean, I think he's the reason why so many people had so much hope for Josh Bahura, but I guess we have to remember waiver wires only happen once in a blue moon when they turn out like this. But case for Forsling, number 1, his availability. Gustav Forsling, ever since he has joined the Florida Panthers, has been nothing short of, I guess you can almost call him an Iron Man. I mean, I believe it was in the 56-game season, he played 43 games, which was the most games he's missed, and he's only improved since then. 71 games played in the President's Trophy year, only 11 games missed. Then didn't miss a game last year, has missed 1 game this year, but that was due to paternity leave, so no injury there. It's extremely hard to find guys who are this durable, yeah. Especially in this kind of system where the defensemen are asked to be more physical, always finish your checks, always be working along the boards. It is an extremely hard thing. I mean, you saw at the beginning of the year Montour and Ekblad missing time, and Forsling has stepped up this year in their place, 5-on-5, to kind of help even out that production that we missed. And it's a strong first case. I mean, you can't look, your best ability is availability. You cannot go wrong with that. And
totally with you there.
Yep. The second case that I have, and we constantly talk about this amongst our Twitter X spaces, is he is the closest thing we have to the Mackenzie Weegar replacement. And what I mean
This
by
is interesting, Cody, because some people loved Uyghur, some people had enough of him at the end. I was always somewhere in the middle, battling with both sides of the Uyghur camp.
Yes.
So I like to see where you're going to go here with Gustav Forsling when you say that.
Yes, so when I mean by the closest thing to a Uyghur replacement, let's see. What was Uyghur good at when he was here in Florida? He was by far the best defender.
Mhm.
Best defender in space. Penalty
He
kill.
stabilized Aaron Ekblad
Yep,
defensively.
Kind of Eki's best years were with Uyghur at his pair. And a guy that could step up in a pinch. And Forsling has slowly but surely he's developed his defensive game. He's at the peak this year defensively, at least in his career with the Florida Panthers. I mean, he's been our best defenseman this year. I don't think that's really undisputed. And it's just the way he's playing right now with the utmost of confidence, and then just being able to break up plays and sometimes create off in the O zone. He's starting to gain a little bit more confidence in the offensive zone.
Mhm.
I would like to see.
He's not spraying and praying, which I used to always criticize him last year. He throws the puck on net with no creativity, no basis for time and space, especially time.
I
He
also
always
think
thought guys were closing in on him, Nick, right? And
right.
now he's being a little bit more creative with the puck and patient with the puck. Go ahead, Nick.
I also think he's a lot more physically engaged this year than he was last year.
I can go through there. Yep.
I think particularly in front of the net, the way he boxes out opponents, right? Like I'll say this, Aaron Ekblad, his partner, not the best skater, right? I think having him next to him, like they've just been unbelievable this year. I also think from a chemistry standpoint that I don't necessarily think that the Ekblad Forsling pairing was very good last year.
It wasn't.
This year it has been.
Let's be
And
real here. It wasn't.
It wasn't. It was
And we were critical of it as hosts, co-hosts, our
But I
speakers.
think at this point they kind of built some chemistry with one another, and Gustav Forsling is playing absolutely outstanding this year. And particularly, and the weird thing is, I thought if he was going to play this well, it'd be that first 2 months when Montour and Ekblad were out. I thought OEL was the better player on that pair, really.
I'm with you there. Nick.
On that, for that first 2 months. But ever since Ekblad came back, Forsling has been terrific, and I think they should make it a point to keep him because, not necessarily saying, oh, they're better defensemen here or there, but it's a guy you have. It's a legit guy who could play tough minutes, who is having an outstanding year. He could continue to play that way.
Now, Nick, you were alluding to numbers. We'll wait till the end of each segment,
Right.
then we'll give our numbers or years or term that the fan base wants to hear from us.
Obviously, all depending on that, and that's what I'm waiting for. So yeah.
But my last case here, or my last piece of evidence here, is Gustav Forsling is by far the best defender on this team when it comes to defending in space. And what I mean by that is, like, off the rush, when he's kind of by himself or on an island, Gustav Forsling is at his best. But how many times this season have you seen him break up odd man rushes due to an active stick? It's been numerous times.
And he's been in better spacing situations, Cody,
Yes.
which you and I said, why is he lost along the boards? Why is he so far away from the boards? His spacing last year was very suspect, to say the least. And we haven't seen those as issues this year. He's really improved upon that.
Yes, and for those of you who are kind of new to hockey or really learning the intricacies of it, spacing as a defenseman is one of the more important things that you need, especially in this day and age with this kind of speed. And Forsling, with being a top 3 skater on this team, he could keep up with anyone. But the thing about him is he's judging his space very well. He's in better positions to break up plays. He's in better spots to maybe support his defense partners or his forwards when they kind of miss an assignment. Like, he's been better in those aspects this year, especially. Where last year, I think, like I said, we can all agree the first pair was not good last year. There was a big reason. The air inconsistencies were a big reason why we struggled throughout the regular season and we barely made the playoffs last year. And it evened out during the playoffs, but I don't think at one point did the first pair ever in the playoffs become a threat. They were just like out there, they just kind of like
disjointed, didn't play together. I
Yeah.
felt, throughout the series.
But now you could tell they're a threat together.
Mhm.
And I find it very, very hard to think about breaking those two up. And
Now, I know we're going to get to the numbers here very soon, but Cody, are we going to see a reflection moving forward of what we saw last year, which wasn't good at all, or what we're seeing this year, which you could say is borderline exceptional, I guess, is where I would put it.
I mean, I believe Forsling has gotten better every year he's been with the Panthers, with the exception of last year. But I think he's the number one thing he's learned how to do better is he's handled physicality 10 times better. Where I think in years past, he needed to have a guy on his pair to offset the physicality, which is why he succeeded in his first tenure with Florida with Radko Gudas.
But he also had a lesser role deployment, and he was with a more physical defenseman than you could even say that he was and has been with Ekblad. So that's something to consider moving forward. And I agree with you, Cody. And I know, Nick, you're going to jump in on this, and Cody will get to your numbers here. But does he continue this physical play, this spacing, smart awareness when the playoffs come?
I did the one thing I do have a little bit of a concern with, as you mentioned, Kirby, was the fact last year was not good. It wasn't. And if you give this guy a long-term deal and he goes back to playing not even the way he was last year, but I think the way he played, like, for example, the President's Trophy, that's not really gonna cut it if he's
a first pairing guy.
If he's a first pairing guy. Now, obviously, he wasn't getting the minutes and the line assignments then that he is now. But I do think that if Gustav Forsling is going to get a big payday, he's going to have to continue playing like this, similar to this. I'm not going to say he has to be as good as it, but he has to be around this level, because that's if we're going to invest long-term money into this guy, this is what we're going to be expecting.
Because he's going to get extra dollars now, and maybe an extra year or two, which Cody's going to give his prediction.
So go ahead, Cody.
I'm interested on this.
Right now, if I were to give Gustav Forsling, I am at 4 or 5 years, you give or take, but I'm at between 5.5. Like, I'm at about 5.2 to 5.7 in that range right now.
Interesting. Okay. And again, we're doing these predictions after the All-Star break. People listening back to this is after the All-Star break, a full half season under our belt here.
And just to give you some names of some guys that are in that pay scale. Shea Theodore is at 5.2. Eric Chernak's also at 5.2. Brady Shea, 5.25. Jacob
That's a good
Slavin,
one.
5.3. Adam Pelech, 5.75.
I heard from the Islander fans, Pelech's game's falling off a bit, but go ahead.
That could be due to the fact that they're overplaying him, but hey, who am I? Esa Lindell, 5.8. Neil Pionk, 5.87.
That's a good one.
And then
different style of play. Pionk's more of a physical guy, but their deployment can be similar at times.
But Brady Shea, I think, is a really good comp to Forsling. He's a bigger guy, but I think they play similarly. Where I think with Shea being bigger, I don't think he's as physical. But I think that is probably around where I would give Forsling. I understand he's having a great year, but once we get past those names, we start hitting and some of these guys signed extensions since then, but this is the number they're at. Rasmus Dahlin at $6 million. Then you get to Ryan Pulock for the Islanders at 6.1. Josh Morrissey at 6.25. Travis Sanheim at the same cap hit, 6.25. Our old friend Mackenzie Weegar at 6.25. Then Hampus Lindholm at 6.5. Then I'll end that at Ryan McDonough at 6.75.
Yeah, a bunch of those guys are ahead of Forsling when it comes to me.
Yes,
for various reasons. Larger sample size, better hockey players have done it for a longer time. What have you?
Yeah, and I believe if you start getting into that $6 million range, I believe you're
you've lost the plot.
You're kind of inching away from where I think he needs to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, Gustav Forsling for me.
I'm surprised there, Nick. I'll be quick on those numbers there. But yeah, if we could get him anywhere from 5.2 to 5.5, sign me up now. I've been critical of Gustav Forsling's play, especially last year, but the season that he's having, 5.2 to 5.5, is very reasonable for the 4 or 5 years I believe that Cody stated. If it starts to inch up towards 5.75, 6 million, 6x6, I'm personally out at that. Or I'm really like struggling to figure out what is Zito's direction here when the fan base says, oh, we can get Reinhart on a sweetheart deal because there's no state income tax, which Nick will get later too in his segment. So when we start to get to those numbers, guys, I'm kind of out, and I'm on the record on my old podcast on Spaces when Mackenzie Weegar was looking at that 6.5, 7 mil number by 6 on the open market, which he never ultimately got to when he got traded to Calgary. I was out on anything really above 6x6 because, as again, the defenseman I'm going to talk about is around the same age as Mackenzie Weegar, and I was worried about age on the end of that back end deal, and kind of how Weegar kind of disappointed us for 2 straight playoffs, and critical mistakes at critical times. So again, I want to see what Gustav does in the playoffs, and then I can evaluate more from there. But I think Cody's very reasonable on that number. Nick, what's your number there?
For me, I'm around what Cody's at. I set my absolute max on it. Like you said, getting to that $6 million range is kind of pushing it for me a little bit. I would say around the anywhere from 5 to like 5.75 for me would be, I'm okay with. Anything past that, I'm like, okay, kind of could have maybe gotten an upgrade if you're going to pay him that much. So that's just my thought process behind it.
Cody, anything on wrapping up there on Gustav Forsling?
No,
Before we
nothing.
transition to Nick.
Nothing that comes to mind there, but like I said, he's having an amazing season. It's just, I think if you put him around those guys that I just mentioned, I don't think it's that bad of a deal either way. Like I said, he's getting more than double his salary. He's only making 2.66 right now. So, like, it's getting the pay raise. And I don't see Zito going past 4 years due to his past contracts, but you'll see.
Before we get to Nick and him making the case for Sam Reinhart, I just want to let everyone know and our listeners, our sponsor, CanesWear. Panthers Fever is here. Are you geared up? CanesWear in Davie is the place for all of your Florida Panther needs. They have the latest gear for our favorite NHL team: jerseys, polos, t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. CanesWear has you covered. Stop by their store in Davie or pantherswear.com. Again, that's pantherswear, WEAR.com, for all your Panthers gear. So Cody just gave us his case for Gustav Forsling. We're going to go to Nick here right away, and he's going to make the case. And it's not going to be that hard to make the case, like
this
Cody
guy
and I mentioned.
Freaking needs one, man.
Cody and I love this guy. He's one of our favorite
Don't
Panthers.
hate the player, hate the
Dog,
Dog, he's got
okay.
40.
Okay,
We're not even
so, that ain't my fault. That ain't
And
my
Nick,
fault.
in our pre-production meetings, Nick said, "Give me Reinhart." I was like, "Oh, okay, Nick. All right." No,
Well,
no.
anyway,
Easy case.
You're getting the
I'll
short
take-
end of the stick next time.
no,
Yeah.
okay. I'll take it from here. So yeah, I mean, Sam Reinhart, we obviously know, is having a terrific season. This is a guy that, as many people know, is second overall pick by Buffalo. This is a really talented guy, and not that he was a bust in Buffalo, but he never really lived up to that full second overall potential. Then he came to Florida, and he has been terrific since coming to Florida. I just a little bit of details about his current contract. He's in the final year of a 3-year deal where he's making $6.5 million per year. He has 7 straight 20-goal seasons and already has 39 this year. He's got 3 straight 30-goal seasons, all with the Panthers. Ever since joining the Panthers, he's over a point per game. He's got 213 points in 212 games. He actually leads the Panthers in goals since joining the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a lot of conversation, right, on our Twitter X Spaces. And I heard the phrase a lot, well, I don't want to pay a guy that much for playing on the third line.
Wink,
Well,
wink.
Sam Reinhart was third amongst forwards on the team last year in ice time. The only players who had more ice time than him was Barkov and Kachuk amongst forwards. It's not necessary. The notion that he's playing on the third line, well, he's playing top 6 minutes, playing first line minutes, he's playing even strength, power play, penalty kill, and having him on that third line last year really helped even out the depth and just created matchup issues for other teams, which is so important. My personal analysis on Reinhart as a player, like I just said, he could play anywhere in the lineup. We've seen it since he got here. He had success with Lundell and Marchman, and then last year with Lundell and Osterinen, and now with Barkov. I just think that in terms of complete players, Reinhart has been unbelievable playing. He's good on the power play. He's good on the penalty kill. And the reason why I'm not overly concerned, and I'll get into his contract in a little bit, about giving him a long-term deal is we mentioned this on previous conversations and the spaces, is that he's not a guy that really relies on speed and physicality. And Paul Maurice actually just came out with a quote today. He says, next to Ron Francis, he's the smartest player he's ever coached. So having that hockey IQ is definitely something that is going to help Reinhart as he ages and as he gets older. He's a guy, very complete player, as I just said. He's a part of the core. It's Barkov, Kachuk, Reinhart. He's a guy that's part of the core, and he plays the way the Panthers like to and want to play. I will say this, if Reinhart does stay in Florida, which he has communicated to the media that he wants to stay, I don't personally believe or think he should get more than should get more than Kachuk or Barkov. A lot of people like to talk about the no state income tax and everything, but I think an advantage here that Florida has that most teams really do not is that extra year. Florida, because he's already on their team, he's under contract for them, and they're going to be though they have his rights. They have the option to give him that 8th year, whereas if he goes to free agency, he's only going to get 7 years. So I think that's going to be a key part for Florida coming into this, where let's say he goes to another team, state income tax or not, gets, $9.5 million, gets 7 years. Well, maybe he could take a little bit less and get that extra year, get that 8th year. So I think that's a component that's not really being talked about too much.
I just want to get Cody in there. Cody, anything there before we get to our numbers, and then Nick's got a few more points I think there as well.
I mean, none. I mean, he's saying everything I want to say. The only thing I really want to say is, for those of you listening, do not let that Ron Francis quote go over your head. Ron Francis, if Sam Reinhart becomes anything close to Ron Francis, any contract he signs is going to be a bargain.
And again, I just think hockey IQ, particularly for a guy who's older, who's getting older, is just going to benefit him more. And there's a couple players that I wanted compare him to, not one for stylistic reasons and another for contractual reasons. So the stylistic player I want to compare Reinhart to, they're probably a little bit different, but in terms of how they have aged, is Joe Pavelski. Joe Pavelski, we all know him as one of the best net front guys in the league in terms of deflections and everything. He is producing at a really high rate. He's on Dallas, the Dallas Stars. He's on their top line with Robertson and Henson. Pavelski has been absolutely outstanding for them. I think that's a similar trajectory that we could see with Reinhart.
Two really good power play guys.
Yeah, two really good power play guys. Obviously, Reinhart's utilization on the power play is a little bit different than Pavelski's has been. But I think that, similar players, very high IQ, good net front presence, not guys that typically over rely on speed and physicality, as I previously had mentioned. I think that's seeing Joe Pavelski makes me a lot less worried about seeing a player like Sam Reinhart. Now, for contract, I'm going to compare the contract reasons. People say, oh, I don't want to overpay him. I'd rather overpay the guy than lose him. So if I have to overpay him $500,000 to $1 million, if I have to overpay him $500,000 to $1 million, I'd rather do that than just lose the guy and have to replace his production, what he brings to the team and everything, because that's going to be very difficult. What
And
I
that's something that Cody and I would have said last year, Cody. And I'm sure Nick would have been on board with that at certain points as well. But yeah, like let's slightly overpay this player
right,
to keep him.
right, and I'll just go through his season by season real quick. His first season in Florida, he had 82 points in 78 games. The following season, last year, 22-23, at 67 and 81. But the first 12 games of the year, Sam Reinhart got off to an awful start. He had 3 points in his first 12 games last year, no goals. After that first 12 games, he really started to pick it up. He had 31 goals in 70 games after that, 64 points, 75-point pace. So we're talking about a guy, it's a 75, 85 point player
And I
who
mean,
can play in all situations of the game.
and I mean,
Co-
down
Co-
year, down
Cody
year,
might steal my point here, but go
I
ahead.
mean, down year, and he gives me 30. I mean, come on.
Like if he would have just gotten off
Nick,
to an average start the first 12 games, imagine he probably would have, who knows what he would have had.
And Nick, you said slow start last year. How about the first season? That's now the fired Buffalo columnist Jerry Sullivan, who came out and made fun of Sam Reinhart. Well, that was in the first season, right? When he started slow there and he picked up his pace. I want to add this point that I thought Cody was going to mention: 16 plus power play goals in all 3 years with the Panthers, and however he finishes his third year at Florida is just going to blow those numbers out.
Glad you mentioned that. He's actually second in the NHL over the last 3 years in power play goals. The only guy ahead of him is Chris Kreider, I believe.
And Chris Kreider had a down year last year, especially when it came to the power play.
But Kreider had a similar year to what Reinhardt's having a couple years ago. I don't think it's going to be as good because Kreider isn't really the all-around complete player that Reinhardt is. But Kreider had, 50 a couple years ago?
Or excuse me, it's actually
Kreider's numbers were ridiculous.
That was over the last got that wrong. It's actually Leon Draisaitl, excuse me.
That makes more sense.
That's Leon Draisaitl. So
and he needs no introduction.
Yeah, so the only guy scoring more than him on the power play is Leon Draisaitl. He's ahead of guys.
If you've got Connor McDavid setting you up, I think a lot of guys would be there. Barkov might be there.
Again,
Kirby could be number one if
he's ahead of
I got good hands. I got good hands.
So forgive me for that. I misspoke there, but
you're not forgiven. Keep going.
But ahead of guys like he's got 10 more power play goals than David Pastrnak. He's got over, like, you just think of the guys that he's ahead of: Pastrnak, Kreider, Zibanejad, Matthews, Stamkos. So it's pretty impressive what he has done. Now, the player I want to compare him to, for contract reasons, is Mark Stone. Now, I know they're different players, right? Mark Stone has had some injury
roles,
similar types of, like, very good
deployment,
wingers.
Similar roles, like
I think that what Mark Stone has done over the last couple of years, I don't think anybody can understate how good he has been for Vegas despite the injuries. He makes $9.5 million a year. So he makes more than some of guys. You might look around the league and see some of these other guys make a little bit less, but if you take a look at where they are at in their contracts, how many years they have left, they're towards the end of those contracts. For a majority of the guys that I'm referring to, or when they signed those contracts, was kind of a little bit of a risk at the time, but also adjusting for the rising cap. But what I think Reinhart should get, and realistically will get, I'm willing to give him the 8 years. And I think anywhere from 8.8 to 9.25 million, because I don't think Tkachuk makes 9.5. Barkov makes 10. And I think it may be fair even if Reinhart got to 9.259, even 8.8. I think that's a fair number for him. Obviously, the state income tax aside, that 8th year obviously helps with it.
I just want to jump in quick there, Cody, then you go ahead. I'm totally, again, with you guys. I was with Cody kind of on Forsey, which Cody surprised me because I thought his number was going to be higher. Nick, that's the number that I've used a lot with Reinhart. And if everyone says Bill Zito can work his magic at this point for Reinhart would probably be between 8.5 and 8.75 on either a 7 or 8 year deal, like you mentioned. So again, whatever the term is for years, give it to him. If it's 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, and people saying, "Oh, give him 5 years so we could take him right to the end of his." That's not how contracts work.
That's not how his agent's going to work.
That's not how this is going to work. I'm like, yeah, let's take 5 years, and then once he's done with the 5 years, he might not be as good as he is anymore. That's not how this works.
And listen, a player like Reinhart, where his greatest asset is his brain, You have their primes last a lot longer than you think.
Yeah,
And
you're gonna rake him over the coals when it comes to contracts. But he's a smart guy. I'm pretty sure he has a smart team representing him.
yeah, and you want to hear a funny stat with Nick's comp, like Mark Stone.
Mhm.
Mark Stone's career high in points in a season. And remember, Mark Stone's dealt with a lot of injuries, so it's probably not as high as it really should be. But Mark Stone's career high in points is 64. Reinhart currently has 64 points.
Yeah, and that's just
His down year
unbelievable.
with Florida was 67.
And again, the first 12 games, he could not buy a goal. Like,
Listen, there were
and
points last year at spaces where people were like, damn near wanted to trade him.
yeah,
Like,
again, I just think that
Boy, that
And you
is
can't
tough.
expect this as we close on Reinhart. You can't expect the season that he's putting up now. Again, Forsling,
Right.
great year on his contract year. Reinhart, great, unbelievable year on his contract year. My guy that I'm going to get into here in a second, not so much. But you can't expect those numbers moving forward. But like Cody said, the longevity is going to be there. One of the smartest players. He's going to age like fine wine. Cody, you didn't give your number yet. We're going to go to Nick and then back to you, Cody. I'm fine, like 9+, just a shade over 9. Like I think he's going to get that.
Yeah.
He's going to get that.
8.5 to 9.2 for 8 years. I'm 100% on the 8 years.
That's
Yeah,
a big
and-
range there, Cody. What are you going with? More the 8.5 or the 9.2 side? I'm more at that 9.2 side.
8.75. That's where I'm
Okay,
at.
you're kind of in the middle, but you'll take more if the number's higher.
If I'm at 8.75, he goes,
I want
9.25. I'm not going to be like,
I want to
Yeah.
take everybody to the season opener next year. 24-25 season?
yes.
Season opener of the 24-25 season. And instead of giving Sam Reinhart, actually, I'll say it like this. Imagine Sam Reinhart not being in the lineup.
I don't like that.
Exactly.
Me and
So
Cody don't like that.
would you rather have to be in a position where Sam Reinhart is no longer in your lineup at all, or you might overpay him $1 million, $1.5 million if it
Some
comes to
fans
that.
are with us, Nick. Some
Yeah.
fans aren't.
So again, like yes, you might overpay a little bit for him, but if you lose him, that's far worse than overpaying him.
Yeah.
So I just
we'll get into Reinhart more in the summer because guys, we do have to move on. But like his defensive awareness, I don't think
Yes.
some of the fans that aren't high on Sam Reinhart, and everyone is this season with the year he's putting up. But next year, let's see when those.
And I'll
numbers
just say
maybe
this:
dip.
I don't want to.
They don't see his defensive side.
I don't want to compare him to this because he's not as good, and Cody's not probably going to love this. But you see what Mason Marshman's doing now. You're like kicking yourself, like damn it, like we could have
You
really
guys are
like
kicking
that.
yourself.
Like we
Winning
could have
DNA.
really
Yep.
like that. Really, that's a guy you just let away, and he's what is he on pace for 65, 70 points right now. Again, it's just a guy. We already lost Marchment, and I think losing Reinhart, I think that'd be a lot worse than losing. People thought
takes
losing
it to a different level.
People thought losing Marchment was bad. People thought losing Gudis was bad. Just waited if we lose.
People
Sam
got on
Reinhart,
about
forget
losing
about it.
Giroux, who wanted to go home for money, and
So-
everyone said he wants to go win a cup.
But
He's not winning a cup in Ottawa.
Unlike those Gudis and Marchment, we actually have the money to re-sign Reinhart, which will hurt
but,
even more.
Cody, I think we know what people were like after we lost those two players. If that's how, if we're missing them, if you're missing them, imagine how much you're going to be missing Sam Reinhart. So I just think this is a no-brainer. I think this should be number one out of all the three guys we're doing. This should be number one for Bill Zito.
I think we're all in consensus on that.
So
so we saved the best for last. So anyone that hasn't heard,
interesting way to put it, but go ahead.
That was with a little sarcasm because I do love Sam Reinhart.
This is going to become a gush fest. Get ready.
Sam Reinhart is part of the Kirby Ally squad, just like this man that I'm going to mention next year. So I love Sam Reinhart, but let's transition.
Captain.
Cody's got to add in all his little chirps. That's what he does to me in the post game, and everyone loves to do that in the post game when we bring up this gentleman's name. But here we go, Brandon Money Monteur. Shout out to my boy D'Lo for that little nickname there. 29 years old. Everyone's trying to age him out. He's not 30 yet. He's not over 30. He's 29 right now. You know what else he is, gentlemen? Right-handed defenseman. Right-handed defensemen don't grow on trees, and they do get paid. So this is the point, in fact, that we could lose a guy like Monteur because the market for a right-handed defenseman, whether it's a contending team or it's a bottom dweller team, they're going to look at that. That's what Radko Gudas was, a right-handed defenseman, plays a different style, obviously, than Brandon Montour. But Cody and I said Gudas was going to be very valued commodity on the market. And that's the thing that I do worry about if we lose Brandon Montour. But let's not get there. Let's pretend, that he's staying with us. It's different scenarios here. I believe he's a secondary core piece, not a core piece, but a secondary core piece. I have Barkov, Kachuk at the top. You got Reinhart right there. You've got Verhaeghe there. And regardless of Montour's age, to me, he's a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th option moving forward with this team, but also especially, guys, in a win-now window. If we were not in a win-now window, I'd be a lot more apt to walk away from him. But like Nick said about Reinhart, if it's a couple extra dollars here, an extra year on the end of the deal with Montour, even if it's got to be a buyout when he's 35, 36, I'm all for it. So again, he is approaching 500 games played. Players like Morgan Riley, who you admittedly better, drafted higher pedigree, he's about to approach game 800. Victor Hedman, number 1 defenseman in Tampa. Again, not comparing him to him. He's over 1,000 games played, not to mention all the wear and tear on his body through a lot of playoff grinds. Brandon Montour, as you mentioned earlier, Nick, and Mesa Marchment, this guy has kind of taken off in the second part of his career where he was playing in floundering systems, in minor league, different things like that. Not as many games on his body. And what does Brandon Montour do well? He skates beautifully. And I think that's going to age. Franchise record defenseman in franchise history last year, 73 points, 16 goals, 57 assists. Last year's playoffs, 21 games played, 8 goals, 5 assists, 13 points. He had 8 points in 7 games played against the NHL's best regular season team in NHL history in the Boston Bruins. He scored 5 goals in that series, 2 in Game 7. The first goal of the game and the game tying goal. You cannot bring in players to replace that and say, match that moment of Brandon Montour. Be a big game player. Be a big time money player. Now, Cody and Nick, you'll say small sample size, and I'm totally with you there. Slow start to this season. The off-season surgery, he hasn't come out like Forsling has and like Reinhart have on contract years. That might save us when we get to the contract numbers. You gentlemen talked about ice time. I am huge component on this. You can't plug and play someone for Brandon Montour. And this is one of my main emphasis here. And this is a 2-year sample size, not only last year, but this year as well. He leads this team in ice time under Paul Maurice. Since Paul Maurice has become coach of the Florida Panthers, Brandon Montour is number 1 in ice time on a season that he had franchise record and a season this year where you can argue he's been underwhelming. 24 minutes and 8 seconds last year. This year, he's at 23 plus. So a little bit under where Nick likes to see that deployment, not as much minutes for guys that's going to wear them down. So he's kind of under a minute from there, but he's still getting all the PP1 quarterback time. He's had that under both seasons with Paul Maurice. Paul Maurice has unlocked him. He talked about in training camp last year, I thought this guy wasn't working hard. And that's what some of the fans are critical of him this year. But Paul Maurice knows I could throw this guy out there and he never gets tired. And he kind of realized that through the first training camp, which again, our former coach, Andrew Brunette, submarined him, didn't see these abilities in him. And this is something that I spoke about like 2 seasons prior when Ekblad went down with an injury and Bruno gave him that initial bump, but then he didn't follow that through even into the playoffs that year. And Brandon Montour was putting up points with in that Washington series, but he was kind of underutilized and, demoted. He had those different defensemen that Cody's talked about. So again, the guy's currently making $3.5 million. That is a bargain. Everyone is talking about Brandon Montour this year like he's making $6-7 million. He's not. He's still on his deal of $3.5 million. Now, we're going to have to look at what we're going to pay him. Reports have been out there, the 7x7. I've never been big on that number. Obviously, that number is going to probably drop from what he's doing right now. But to me, and people laugh, but he has young legs. I don't care about the age. He skates perfectly in today's NHL. He is the perfect defenseman for this era of NHL. And when you have a guy like Gustav Forsling, you're like, well, we can lose a guy in Brandon Montour because we have Gustav that could skate well. You don't want to give that up. You want to keep guys that could skate well. You add pieces to that, like Nico Mikkola, who has really been good with Brandon Montour. And it would be a real shame with 2 guys that I like a lot in Brandon Montour and Mikkola if we're just going to see this for 1 year and we're going to move on from Brandon Montour in the offseason. So again, today's NHL is all about skating. I think the ages thing is a new phenomenon. If you look at former players, Ray Bourque, Dennis Podfen, and I'm not comparing to those guys. Those guys had monster years at their 35, 36, 37, Nicholas Lidstrom. But I want to use, guys, some comparables here, and I want you guys to jump in on this. I found 30-plus-year-old comps. Now, a couple guys at the top, the first few names, you might argue are better players than Brandon Montour, but also were paid more than Brandon Montour in that marketplace at the time. And I'm not saying that's what he should be paid in this. One that I found, Ryan Suter, he's the top comp. He's a left-handed defenseman, so he's not right-handed, so that drops him a little bit. He made $7.5 million on his 30-plus deal. He had 5 seasons at 40-plus points, guys, after the age of 30. So people that are like, well, Kirby, I think he might have 1 season, and then he's going to drop off. Ryan Suter had 5 seasons at 40-plus points after the age of 30.
Yeah, but I don't think. But Ryan
That's
Suter,
my top comp. That's my top one.
Yeah,
that I
Ryan
don't think
Suter was a lot more established at the time that he signed that deal. Because remember, at the time he signed that deal, I'm assuming you're picking the 13-year deal that he signed with Minnesota.
Yeah, that's the contract
Remember,
there, and that's at $7.5 million. Montour's not even going to touch that with inflation now, Cody.
Yeah, I mean, but at the time he was like one half of the best pairing in the NHL, or one of the best pairings with him and Shea Weber. So,
but again, I don't think we have a Ryan Suter at that level in our
Yeah.
lineup. People can agree to disagree, but I'm just saying for
I
age.
just think Suter's a little bit more two-way than Montour is.
But again, that's the top comp. I'm going to start to go lower. Guys like Justin Falk, Brian McCabe. Justin Falk, he's almost at 900 games played now, guys. Remember what I said with Montour? He's only approaching game 500. 47 points for Justin Falk at age 29, 50 points at age 30. You guys told me 45, 55 points. You would take that and run with that with Montour. Brian
How
McCabe.
much does Falk make?
6.25.
Yeah. So again, a number I think that Montour will be below.
But and I will say this, I don't think the Justin Falk contract is currently or really has ever been a good contract either.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I think that's another.
But that is also kind of revisionist history there as well.
Yeah.
Probably at his best, people were thinking of what they thought of Brandon Montour last year. Brian McCabe, his game really fell off at the end of Toronto. He came to Florida at 34 years old, 43-point season. He was playing, Nick's not going to like this, 23-20 of ice time. He was quarterbacking the power play. He wasn't in his prime at that point, but he still put up productive seasons on a, average to fringe kind of playoff team with the Panthers, who didn't end up ultimately getting over that hump into the playoffs. But I think they were right around that bubble. That's the year I think that they lost in a tiebreaker. Some other names, Wisniewski, 68-point season at 34 years old. He played 883 games in the NHL. Mark Streit, he started in the NHL at age 28, guys. He had 6 seasons at 40-plus points after the age of 30. Robert Svala, we're going way back in time, but for the OGs out there, 49-point season at age 31. He had a 45-point season at age 34 with the Leafs when people thought he was kind of all done. This is a name that I talked with Cody off the air. Cam Fowler, he's making $6.5 million. Again, I think Montour makes a little bit under that. 24-10 of ice time, 48-point season at the age of 31. This is a better comp for Brandon Montour. Tyson Barrie, 55-point season at the age of 31. He also had 31 power play points in that season. And that's kind of where Montour is maybe over time becomes a little bit more of a specialist. But again, guys, with his skating, I think some of these guys he skates better than. Some of them, sure, they're better than him. They're going to make more money than him.
And
but I think these are some comps to use.
Tyson Barrie's cap hit?
Like 4 point something right now.
Is that what he's at right now? His contract before that was a little bit higher. But again, I don't think Montour's getting 4 point something on the market. If you think that, then that's disrespect. And I think he's going to walk and you're going to lose a good player. So I don't know if you guys want to jump in there. I've got a couple more points that I want to make.
I'll say this. I'll let you make your prediction. And then I'll give my thoughts on it. I think I'll just talk about Brandon Montour really as a player here. He's an excellent skater. Like you said, he does have less games under his belt than a player his age normally would.
Yep.
But the issue I do have is he ever going to get back to any semblance of the form he was last year? Because what we've seen from Brandon Montour, he's been a good player. I'm not saying he's not a good player, right? But I think what we've seen over the last couple of years, right, is like Brandon Montour, pretty good. Boom, unbelievable, and then came back down to earth. So my question is last year the exception, Or is that the rule? Is that who Brandon Montour really is? That's where I get a little bit.
Well,
I don't
if he's a
know.
73-point guy, Nick, then you're
Well,
paying him
even
eight,
any
9 million.
semblance of that, because if we're going to be paying a guy, and I don't know what your number is exactly, but it's going to be probably, from what I heard, above 5.5 million based off the way you've talked about him on
Yeah.
the spaces. Is this going to be a guy? Am I really going to be okay with giving him a power play specialist 40 to 45 points for almost $6 million? I don't know about that.
I want to jump in. I want to jump in there, Cody, before we get to contracts. But 1% WAR when he was traded to Florida, 3% EV defense, and I don't think it's been talked about enough how good defensively he's been this year. If you look at individual game score charts, he's been best defenseman numerous times this year, not one off, not twice. He's been best defense metrics, and I don't think he's getting credit for that. And you could say, oh, he's playing with Mikkola. Last year he was playing with Mark Stahl. Okay, a 37, 38-year-old Mark Stahl. This year, he's got a competent partner. And Maurice, as much as he believes in Reinhart, I feel the same about Montour. Look how he deploys them. Look who's on the ice at the end of games. I think those are key things to point out.
Hey.
But his defensive awareness and improvement is not being talked about enough.
Hey, shout out Mark Stahl. You gave us good minutes last year.
Send all your DMs comments to Cody on that one.
I'll fight that all day. The one thing, like Montour, to me, he's never hitting that 73-point thing again, like that year again. Because one, I think it kind of gets lost in the cracks. We needed pretty much about 60 of those 73 points last year. Like those were huge points when our D-core was at probably
Nothing.
its worst.
He was carrying the team, literally.
And then who can forget his the first round versus Boston? Four or 5 goals in that first round series.
I got 5 goals, 2 in Game 7.
2 in Game 7, 2 in Game 2. I don't know where the other one was.
Yep.
I mean, he was a integral, a huge part in us upsetting Boston. And it's just, I believe, it just comes down to the AAV. Like I said, I don't think he's not hitting 73 points ever again. It's not happening.
And I agree with you.
Is that a bad thing? No, because he's not that upper echelon tier defenseman, which isn't a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily, you really don't need your power play coordinator to be up 60 points every year. 73 points is damn near point per game if you play every game. But the thing about me is a lot of the guys get this excuse, but I think Montour kind of needs it a little bit. I think Montour deserves the same excuse. He had off-season surgery too. Is he still battling back from that? Will he get back to that? Because his shot has not been as good as it was last year. He's been, as I like to say, destroying the plexiglass. I need to
Cody's a little critical on that, but he has been a little off, and his shooting percentage has got to come up a bit.
I just need better shots of if you go back to the goal in the Pittsburgh game, where Gadjevich tipped it in. I want more of that. Just on net, tippable, not something aimed high glove and just smashing the plexiglass.
Were you watching the Vegas game? The Kachuk redeflection in Vegas? There was one there against the Stanley Cup champs. So, yeah, I think he shows up in those moments, but he has to be better in the second half, especially offensive production-wise. But, guys, let's get to our number here because we want to wrap with a couple things here on this podcast episode. My number, it's not changing too much. It's probably dropped a little because of this. So, I think a 6x6 is fine, but he might get below 6 with Zito, the no state income tax thing, but he could get more on the open market. I don't know if he's pushing on that 7x7 or 6 years by 7 mil. I think that might not happen off of the sample size that you're looking at last year, this year, but easily 5.5. Anything below that, I think is very disrespectful. But if Zito could get somewhere between 5.5, 5.75 on a 5-6 year deal, and even if you got to buy out that last year, I'm fine with that. We're in a win now window. So if everyone's worried about the last year or two, your priorities are not focused on the end goal here, which is the Stanley Cup, which is icing the best team possible. You cannot find a guy on the market to plug and play what he's doing for this team. Power play, quarterbacking, the minutes that he's doing, the middle pairing, you can't find that.
I'm a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
He might be a little bit more valued into Forsling because I believe like power play is a little bit more meaningful to a team now than penalty kill. But 6 is pushing it for me once again.
Yeah, I agree with Cody on that
I need
point.
more consistent play if I'm giving him 6. Like right now, I'm at 5.3 to 5.8 for 4 years.
Yeah.
Once again, I'm at that.
Where are you
4-year
closer to? Five? You're too big of marks. 5.3 or 5.8. Where are you closer to on the record?
I guess I'm closer to 5.8, but I'm not going above 4 years. I like that.
For me,
I like that rule Zito's put in place.
I'll do this, right? I'll say this. 5.2 to 5.6 for me. I'd go 5.5 for 5 years. And would I be thrilled with it? No, but I wouldn't be throwing a fit over it.
5.5 kind of borderline that he maybe walks.
5.5 for 5 years. I think that's fair because I just don't think you can it limits the point. Like, I'll ask you this question, Kirby. What cap hit, like if he had gotten re-signed this last summer, what would he have gotten? What do you think he should have gotten?
I was probably closer to the 6.25, 6.5 range, but that number's probably dropped.
Okay,
and maybe Zito gets below that because of the
and that's probably maybe what I think most people would have been at, especially after last year.
People that weren't out on him.
I think that this year, after the way he's played, I think 5.5 is a fair number.
So he's lost about 750,000, $1 million.
Yeah, and that's
it's just a
the way it is.
Thing.
The consistency, because here's the
5.5,
thing, right?
you're starting to push.
I think, and I know I have to take the adjustment and everything, but I think when you get to 6, 6.5, 7, those are like legit top pairing number 2 defensemen. And I know Brandon Montour plays a lot, but he doesn't play necessarily in every situation. He's a lot of time on the power play. He's a great puck moving defenseman. He plays a lot of important minutes, but in terms of penalty kill and maybe the final 2 minutes defending a lead, that's where maybe that extra 750,000 to 1 million, 1.5 million would go if he had been a little bit better in those areas. I still think he's a good defenseman. He's a great skater. Probably, I think the way he skates, I think he's especially last year was our best skating defenseman. And he was paired with our worst skating defenseman last year. But I think, yeah. So I think that 5 years, I'd be okay with 4 or 5 years, around 5.3 to 5.7, anywhere from that range. I'd be okay with 5.
Yeah, you guys have a bit of a gap, and I understand your guys' perspective too, and of course I'm higher on the player as well. So, but yeah, that's kind of wrapping up our make the case. We'll make sure to have more of these series, guys, before we go tonight. I'm going to briefly get this in. We'll spend more time on this on future episodes, but starting now through March 8th, if you follow me on Twitter X Spaces, myself and the community will share names that we're targeting in the trade deadline. So guys, we're going to be very quick with this, but one of my names that I've written about, and I can send it to you out there, community, if you haven't read it yet, is Mike Hoffman, former Panther specialist winger who can play on the power play 1 and inside the top 9. Hoffman's career high scoring years were 36 goals and 29, and power play scoring was at 17 goals and 11. Hoffman has been part of some of the bottom tier power play since moving on from Florida in Montreal and San Jose. And I think, he's a guy that can bring those numbers up. Now, since I wrote that article on January 22nd, Panthers power play numbers have been going up, up, and up. So, and again, trying to find that guy on that third
Twitter
line.
Bump in the other direction. Sweet.
So, again, a guy that, at 34 years old would be strictly, I believe, a rental at this time, but has, just like I mentioned with Brandon Montour, I think Mike Hoffman still got some good hockey left in him and can be a potential trade target option. I know, guys, you're going to share some names as we go along here. Nick, do you have one very quickly here before we wrap?
Yeah, so I know a lot of people are talking about the top 9 forward, which I believe is the biggest need in this
here we go
trade deadline, but I using this to promote my Nick Sealer propaganda. The guy is really good physical third pairing defenseman, can play 16.5, 17.5 minutes a night towards the top of the league and block shots. He's affordable. If Philly is willing to trade him, I think a second would be a little rich for Sealer. Maybe a third or a fourth I could see. But this is a guy that costs less than $800,000 cap hit. You could get for a third or fourth round pick. And it just improves your bottom pair. Why wouldn't you do it and then move Kulikov down to the 7? Just gives you extra depth, gives you a better bottom pair. And again, like I said, what Vegas did with the minute allocation last year, more evenly distributing the minutes amongst their defensemen in the Stanley Cup final last year. That's kind of what I want to aim for. I think Sealer
Yep.
on the
Yep.
team would definitely help with that.
Thank you, Nick. And Cody, we'll have some more names likely next time. I know you're gonna have one right up for me here. believe
Yep. But
for
right
next
before we
year.
go,
Yep.
my one guy, Boone Jenner, maybe a little pricier on the market, but cheaper, $3.75 million cap hit, very versatile, can play drive the line, and knows Zito pretty well because old Columbus guy. And I believe Boone Jenner could be a very good top 9 forward for not even this year, but for next year.
Yeah, that's interesting proposition with going forward with some of these names that are going to be strictly rentals versus maybe if Zito can lock someone in. But like we talked about, there's got to be money allocated to these names that we talked about here tonight on Make the Case series. So before we go here, I want to thank everyone in our community. Our first episode got rave reviews. Give us those 5-star thumbs up, whether you're following us on Spotify, Apple, or on YouTube, Amazon Music as well. And you could follow us on Instagram at Cats and Rats Podcast, and obviously on the Twitter X brand that we always go live after every post game. But we'd just like to thank my co-hosts here tonight, Cody and Nick. And let's go Panthers. Thanks, guys.